How carbon capture works. Hey, I'm G. Ever walked into a coffee shop, watched the barista steam milk, and wondered if there's a way to capture that steam before it escapes into the atmosphere? Or maybe you've glanced at the sky on a hazy summer afternoon and thought, if only we could pull some of that CO2 out of the air, would the air feel a little cleaner? Those fleeting what if moments are the spark behind today's episode. In the next few minutes, we'll unpack the science, the politics, and the history behind carbon capture, utilization, and storage. The toolbox the world is turning to in order to keep the planet from heating past safe limits. Welcome to the Stuff You Should Think About, where I answer questions about everyday phenomena and objects in bite-sized episodes. First, a quick note about me. I'm not a carbon capture engineer by trade, nor do I hold a PhD in climate science. What I do have is a genuine fascination for how things work, a habit of digging deep, and a committing to translating that research into plain English. Carbon capture can be thought of as a three-act play: capture, transport, and storage utilization. Here's a practical walkthrough of each act, with the most common techniques highlighted. First, there's the capture. This is a post-combustion capture, where it happens after fossil fuels are burned. CO2 is mixed with nitrogen, water vapor, and trace gases. How it works. First, flue gas scrubbing. The hot exhaust gas is passed through an absorber tower where an amine-based solvent chemically binds CO2. Next, there's the regeneration. The CO2-rich solvent is heated to 120 degrees Celsius in a stripper column, releasing a relatively pure CO2 stream, about 99% purity. The solvent is often cooled and recycled. The pros can be retrofitted into existing power plants and industrial boilers. Cons: energy intensive, and the solvents degrade over time, requiring chemical replenishment. Pre-combustion capture. Where it happens in integrated gasification combined cycle plants or hydrogen production facilities. How it works. First, there's a gasification, which is fossil fuel is partially oxidized, produces a synthesis gas, syngas, of CO2 and H2. Next, there's the shift reaction. CO2 plus H2O goes to CO2 plus H2. There's a water gas shift. Next, there's CO2 removal. CO2 is separated, often via physical solvents like Selexol or via pressure swing absorption. Pros and cons. Pros: higher CO2 concentrations make separation easier. The resulting hydrogen can be used as a clean fuel. Cons: requires an upfront gasification step, making it less suitable for retrofitting existing plants. Next, there's oxy-fuel combustion. This is specially designed boilers that burn in a near pure oxygen environment. How it works. Oxygen enrichment. Air separation units deliver O2 instead of air to the furnace. Next, there's combustion. This produces a flue gas that is primarily CO2 and water vapor. Next, there's condensation. Water is condensed out, leaving a higher purity CO2 stream ready for compression. The pros: simplifies capture, high CO2 concentration. Cons: air separation units are energy intensive. The technology is still emerging at commercial scale. Next, there's direct air capture, DAC. Where it happens: dedicated facilities that pull ambient air through contactors. How it works: two leading chemistries. First one being liquid solvent. Air contacts an alkaline solution. CO2 forms carbonate, which is later regenerated with heat. Next, there's a solid sorbent. This is where air passes over a matrix that physically absorbs CO2. A modest temperature swing releases the gas. Pros and cons. Pros: remove CO2 directly from the atmosphere, independent of point sources. Cons: very low CO2 concentration in ambient air, 415 parts per million. Make the process energy intensive. Current cost ranges from 100 to 600 per ton of CO2 captured. Next, there's transport. Once CO2 is captured, it must travel to a storage or utilization site. The main transport modes are pipeline, the industry standard for large-scale point source capture, e.g. from power plants. Pipelines operate at 100 to 150 bar, requiring compressor stations every 50 to 100 kilometers. Ships and trucks, used for similar volumes, longer distances, or when crossing international waters. CO2 is liquefied for transport. Key safety considerations include leak detection, corrosion control. CO2 is mildly acidic when mixed with water, and the need for robust monitoring. Storage and utilization. Geological storage. One being deep saline aquifers, porous rock saturated with brine at depths below 800 meters. They offer the largest theoretical capacity, thousands of gigatons. The next one would be depleted oil and gas reservoirs. Already proven to hold hydrocarbons, they can be repurposed for CO2 storage, sometimes with enhanced oil recovery as a secondary revenue stream. Amenable coal seams. CO2 can be injected to displace methane, which can be captured for energy. Verification and monitoring. Wellbore integrity testing, seismic imaging, and pressure monitoring ensure that CO2 stays trapped. Regulatory frameworks, e.g., the U.S. EPA's Underground Injection Control Program, requires a post-closure care period of at least 50 years. Utilization. Chemical feedstocks. CO2 can be hydrogenated to methanol, formic acid, or polycarbonate plastics. Mineralization. Reacting CO2 with silicate rocks to form stable carbonates. Biological pathways. Algae farms can use CO2 as a carbon source to produce biofuels, proteins, or bioplastics. An economic note. Utilization currently accounts for more than 10% of captured CO2 because market demand for CO2 derived products is limited and the process can be costly. However, advances in catalysts and renewable hydrogen could shift that balance. Carbon capture is one of the rare climate solutions that enjoys broad political support. In many countries, for several reasons. Progressive green parties. And it gets a nod because mitigation tool that complements renewable energy, buying time for a just transition. Centrist, business-friendly parties gets a nod because it generates new jobs in engineering, construction, and operations, offers a revenue stream, EOR, carbon credits. Conservative energy security advocates gets a nod because it reduces dependency on foreign oil by extending the life of domestic fossil assets while cutting emissions. Regional stakeholders gets a nod because rural areas can host storage sites, providing tax revenue and infrastructure upgrades. In the United States, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law of 2021 allocated $3.5 billion to the regional carbon sequestration partnerships and $4.5 billion to DEO funded CCUS R&D. The European Union's Innovation Fund similarly backs CCUS projects across member states, regardless of their energy mix. The common thread is that CCUS is framed as a pragmatic bridge. It doesn't ask any sector to abandon its current assets overnight, but it does demand measurable emissions reductions. The win-win narrative explains why you hear CCUS in bipartisan policy speeches, corporate ESG reports, and even some green conservative think tank publications. Historical context. 1970s. First CO2 injection trials. The Sleipner field in North Sea, Norway, became the world's first commercial CO2 storage project in 1996, injecting CO2 into a depleted gas reservoir to boost methane recovery. 1990s. Kyoto Protocol recognized carbon sinks, forests, soils, but omitted large-scale engineering solution, prompting later advocacy for negative emissions technologies. The 2000s. International CCS Initiative, ICSI, launched by the International Energy Agency, IEA, to share best practices and develop a global CCS roadmap. 2010s. Scaling up. Projects like Boundary Dam, Canada's first commercial post-combustion CCS plant at a coal-fired power station, and Petra Nova, U.S., the largest post-combustion CCS plant before its 2020 shutdown, demonstrated viability. These milestones show a gradual shift from experimental pilots to commercial scale deployments. The technology's trajectory mirrors that of natural gas extraction. Initial skepticism, heavy regulation, incremental cost reductions, and final mainstream acceptance. Legal precedents. United States. Key law and regulation was the Clean Air Act, CAA, Section 111D, 2021, allows states to set CO2 emission standards for existing plants, encouraging CCS retrofits. The impact, it provides a regulatory carrot for utilities that adopt CCS to meet state-specific carbon caps. European Union, EU Emissions Trading System, EU ETS, 2021 revision includes carbon capture and storage regulation that defines a EU-wide permit for stored CO2. The impact is it creates a market-based incentive. Stored CO2 can be counted towards compliance reduction, reducing the need for expensive allowances. Canada, Carbon Capture and Storage Regulation 2021 under the Impact Assessment Act mandates verification plans for storage projects. The impact sets rigorous monitoring standards, boosting public confidence and investor certainty. Australia, Carbon Capture and Storage Act 2022 proposed aims to streamline approvals for offshore storage. The impact highlights growing interest in geological storage offshore to serve mining and LNG sectors. International, London Protocol 1996, Protocol on the Prevention of Marine Pollution from Land-Based Sources, amended to allow subsea CO2 storage under strict environmental assessment. Impact, open the doors for offshore storage projects while ensuring marine ecosystem protection. These legal frameworks serve two overarching purposes. One, ensuring safety and environmental integrity, and two, providing financial certainty through permits, tax credits, and carbon pricing. I'm a self-confessed optimist when it comes to engineering solutions, especially those that can be scaled quickly and monetized. My background in renewable energy consulting has shown me how policy incentives can unlock capital for technologies that were previously too expensive. That said, I also recognize the danger of techno-solutionism, relying on carbon capture alone without parallel decarbonization of electricity generation risks a moral hazard where polluters feel justified in continuing to burn fossil fuels. My bias leans toward integrated approaches, CCS as a complement to renewables, not as a substitute. If you share a more skeptical view, perhaps you think the world should focus solely on demand-side measures like energy efficiency. Let's discuss it. The best policies emerge from robust debate, not echo chambers. The hydrogen era of 1970s. When the oil crisis hit the 1970s, governments worldwide funded hydrogen research as an alternative fuel. The ambition was high, but the technology lagged. Costs were prohibitive, and the oil price shock eventually subsided. The result, hydrogen stayed niche for decades, resurfacing only now with cheap renewable electricity. Lessons for CCUS. A technology can sit on the sidelines for decades if policy, market, and cost conditions don't align. Patience is required, but so is periodic policy reinforcement to keep momentum alive. The scrubber turnaround in the 1990s. Acid rain in the 1980s spurred the U.S. Clean Air Act amendments of 1990, mandating flue gas desulfurization scrubbers for coal plants. Initially, many utilities balked. Costs were high and the technology was not fully proven at scale. However, with tax credits, Section 1603, and state level markets for sulfur dioxide, installation surged, achieving a 90% reduction in SO2 emissions within a decade. Lesson for CCUS: economic incentives coupled with clear regulatory mandates can turn a nice to have technology into a market imperative. Carbon capture is not a monolith. There are several pathways that can be mixed and matched depending on geography, industry, and capital availability. Here are some of the most common solution bundles. Power plant retrofit. Best fit, existing coal gas plants in developed economies. The key technology is post-combustion amine scrubbing plus pipelines, saline aquifer. Typical cost is $70 to $120. The next one is an industrial cluster. Cement, steel, and petrochemical hubs, e.g. Gulf Coast, Texas. Technology, pre-combustion or oxy-fuel capture plus EOR or CO2 to chemicals. The cost is $50 to $100. And these costs are USD to ton CO2. Direct air capture is the next one. Plus utilization. Best fit is regions with abundant renewable electricity, Iceland or Nevada. Key technology, solid sorbent DAC plus electrochemical reduction to fuels. Typical cost, $150 to $600. Carbon negative bioenergy. Best fit, agricultural zones with ample biomass residues. Key technology, biomass combustion. CO2 capture post combustion. Cost for this is about $80 to $130 per. Hybrid storage utilization. Best fit, nations with strict carbon budgets, e.g. EU members, Key technology, capture, portion stored, remainder turned into synthetic fuels, and the cost would be $100 to $200 per U.S. ton of CO2. Strategic takeaway: no single approach will meet the global target. A portfolio mixing point source capture, direct air capture, and nature-based solutions is essential. Decision markers should assess resource availability, local demand for CO2-derived products, and regulatory incentives before committing to a specific pathway. In summary, carbon capture consists of three core stages: capture, transport, and storage utilization. Each stage has multiple technological options, from traditional mean scrubbing at power plants to cutting-edge solid sorbent direct air capture. Next is energy demand. The heat penalty remains the biggest cost driver. Improving solvent regeneration, integrating waste heat, and using renewable electricity are active research fronts. Next is bipartisan support. Stems from the technology's ability to simultaneously cut emissions, protect jobs, and extend the life of existing energy assets. This political flexibility has unlocked billions in public funding worldwide. Next would be legal scaffolding. From the U.S. Clean Air Act to the EU CCS regulation provides both safety, oversight, and market incentives. But the pathwork nature of regulation still creates project-level uncertainty. My personal bias favors an integrated climate strategy where carbon capture complements, not replaces, renewable energy and demand-side measures. Historical parallels scrubbers for SO2, the stalled hydrogen era, illustrate how policy incentives and market uncertainty dictate technology adoption curves, multiple pathways, retrofits, industrial clusters, DAC, BECCS, enable a portfolio approach that can be customized to local needs and resource endowments. In short, carbon capture works, but it works best when paired with strong policies, transparent monitoring, and a realistic view of its economic limits. That's it for this episode of Stuff You Should Think About. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into carbon capture. If you found this guide helpful, hit the subscribe button, download, leave a comment so you don't miss future episodes on everything from why your fridge hums to the physics of quantum commuting. I'd like to hear what you think. Do you see carbon capture as a viable climate solution in your region? Which capture technology intrigues you the most and why? What topics should we explore next? Leave a comment below. Share the post with a friend who loves science and stay curious. This post is for information purposes only. All statements reflect publicly available information and scientific census.